So today we have Dr. Nadim Wehbe. He is the department head for civil and environmental engineering at South Dakota State University. He was actually one of my, I guess, mentors, one of the main mentors, since he's focuses in structure. So he's one of my main mentors when I went to school at South Dakota State. He is also the John M. Hansen Professor, which is a distinguished title that he has received based on his accomplishments, and the director of many other things, kind of involved in many things. He has his PhD, and he is also a fellow of the ACI and the Structural Engineering Institute within the American Society of Civil Engineers, and a fellow for the American Society of Civil Engineers. So thank you, Dr. Wehbe, for joining today. I know it's a super busy time with everything going to virtual and all of the craziness of transitioning. So I'm sure you're crazy busy, but I appreciate you taking time to sit down with me. So thanks.
Well, thank you, Carrie. It is my pleasure to be talking with you today.
Awesome. So if you could start, maybe just give a little bit of information as far as where you grew up and maybe what you wanted to do when you were younger, what kind of led you into the career path that you have?
I was born and raised in my native country of Lebanon. It's a tiny country on the Eastern Mediterranean Sea. It's probably about the size of 4 times the size of Rhode Island, a very tiny country. Although the country is only 10,400 square kilometers, it has such a variety of scenery, from coastal areas to snow-covered mountains. So I grew up in a coastal town only 5 miles south of Beirut, the capital of the country. And as a child, I spent a lot of time during my summer vacation from school on the beach because we were in a coastal town. My childhood and teenage years were in the 1960s and the 1970s, so you can tell the impact of these 2 decades on my character and my likings. I went to school in Lebanon. My K through 12 schooling was in Lebanon. And then I went to the American University of Beirut for my undergraduate education, where I earned my Bachelor of Engineering degree. After that, I left the country for work opportunities overseas, and have not lived there on a permanent basis ever since. When I left at the age of 21, I used to still go back for visits, but not as frequent as I used to.
So you got your degree in civil engineering from, did you say, in Lebanon, but what was the name of the university?
It is American University of Beirut, okay. AUB, okay. Basically. Okay. It's one of the best universities in the region. Was established in 1866 by an American missionary, Dr. Bliss, and it has been a hub of education for the area, not only for Lebanon, but for the entire region ever since it was established.
Sure. So then you started working, did you start working consulting then?
Correct. I started to work in structural engineering. I graduated in 1980 with my degree, undergraduate degree, and worked for almost 9 years in the profession. And after that, I decided to go back to graduate school, but probably this is something that we can talk about in a little bit. Unless you want.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so you went to graduate school in Reno, is that right?
Yes, I went back to graduate school at the University of Nevada, Reno, where I earned my master's and my PhD in structural engineering.
Okay. So what was the impetus to go back to school?
Well, I always wanted to go to graduate school, especially after I earned my undergraduate degree. So I had different options back then. Either go to graduate school in engineering or combine engineering with business. Back then it was a very hot combination. So actually I applied to business schools and engineering schools here in the United States, and I got acceptance from some of the prominent universities here in the United States. But back then, when I graduated with my undergraduate degree, there was a lot of work going on in the Gulf region, not the Gulf region here in the United States, the Arab Gulf region. The money was so good, and you know, being a poor student, you just graduated and you don't have any money. Money was a major factor in my decision to go into the workforce rather than pursue a graduate degree. So it was always on my mind. The graduate degree was always on my mind. So after we settled in the United States, I decided to go back and pursue my graduate degrees as a non-traditional student.
Sure. Did you go straight, so from your PhD to collegiate level, like, did you go straight from getting your PhD to South Dakota State?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, I came here right after earning my doctorate degree.
Okay. I feel like that real world, like just now that you're talking or whatever, like that real world experience that you received, and then coupled with your, you know, the scholastic side of it, or, you know, the research side of it, I feel like that was like a very great balance, and I'm sure it is for your students now. But I just remember being in your classes and you always had a real world example to tie it to. So it wasn't just the theory, it was also a real world example. And I think that made it much more intriguing and interesting, because we could all see that this, like, there was like a bridge between the theoretical stuff that we were learning. I didn't mean to use that analogy of a bridge in a structural conversation here, but you know, there's a bridge between the theoretical things that we're learning and then what we're going to be doing. So it's almost like you gave us a look into what our future was going to be like, as far as what we could see ourselves doing. And I think that's very valuable and not always common. So thanks. I think a lot of us appreciated that.
Well, I really appreciate that you noticed that during the classes you took from me. And I always think that practical experience is indispensable. I mean, it's one thing to be brilliant in the classroom and studying the books, but there is no alternative to being out there and seeing how things are done. And it's a completely different world as a practicing engineer.
Right.
And my experience also helped me during graduate school, because my dissertation involved experimental work, and being in the lab and preparing my specimens. My practical experience helped me a lot, solving issues and problems in building my specimens and testing them.
Sure.
At least this is what my PhD advisor once told me. He said, "I really appreciate your background because it reflects in the lab."
Yes. Well, and I think that probably carried through to the structures lab at SDSU, right? I mean, you were instrumental in starting that up and getting that established as kind of a regional place for research, right?
That's correct. I was lucky enough to be involved with establishing that facility here at SDSU.
Okay.
And it made all the difference to our research program.
Yes. Because I think, I mean, when I started school, I'm not sure there weren't any PhDs in structural. I don't think there was any sort of opportunity for that, correct? Was there a master's program?
Correct.
Okay.
There was a master's program, and we started the PhD only recently, I guess back in 2015.
Okay.
That's
Okay.
when we reintroduced. I'm told that in the old days, predates my time, we used to have a PhD degree in engineering here at State. But when I came here, we did not offer such a degree. And then in 2015, we reintroduced the PhD degree to the program.
Okay. Okay. And without the lab there that you started up, that would not be an opportunity. That would not
Absolutely.
be an option.
Absolutely.
No. All right. So when you were little, what did you want to be? A surfer?
You know, not really, although I enjoyed, we don't have big surfs back in Lebanon, but I enjoyed surfing as much as the opportunity. But really, as I was telling you a short while ago, I'm a child of the 60s and the 70s. And in the 60s, the American space program was at its earnest. I mean, it had started and there was a competition with the Soviet space program. So I was intrigued with the space program. And like every child of that era, I wanted to be a pilot. Of course, being involved in a space program was not realistic for me, being from a different country, in a tiny country, but the next best thing was to become a pilot. So as a child, I always wanted to be a pilot. But then, you know, interests change as you grow up. And, so as I was growing up, my dad was a plumbing contractor. So on few occasions, I used to go with him to the job site. And I remember one time seeing the engineer of record coming to site and inspecting things, and that fascinated me. This person of authority coming in and making sure that everything was being constructed the way it's supposed to be. So I started to grow some interest in structures.
Okay.
And then when I was in high school, I had made up my mind that I wanted to be an engineer.
Okay. Okay. Very interesting. Okay. So like, what's maybe one of your least expected hobbies? What would be something like unexpected?
You'll be surprised to hear me say that. um, I honestly would like to do manual chores like fixing stuff around the house or working in the backyard to the sound of classic rock music.
Okay. Okay. What is your favorite band?
Well, I like Led Zeppelin,
Okay.
Pink Floyd. Pink Floyd was great in the 70s. And
Yes.
AC/DC.
Okay.
So all the
Fleetwood
classic
Mac?
rock. Fleetwood Mac, which came a little bit, in the 70s came out. They were big in
Okay.
the 70s. Yeah, I like Fleetwood Mac.
Okay.
Sure.
Okay. I like that. I can see how that would be a good balance to like the theoretical using, your brain, and then just like there is some satisfaction of like manual labor and, seeing a goal and being able to achieve it without having the complexities of figuring it out in your head.
Exactly. Sometimes you feel that you just want to push him over.
Yeah.
And listen to music. This is how I decompress after a long week in the office or in the classroom or in the
Okay.
lab.
Okay. No, I can see that. I kind of like to swing a hammer every once in a while. My accuracy isn't great, but I do enjoy it every once in a while. So for a little bit, for a hot second until I get tired.
Yeah.
What would be something that you're passionate about, like beyond civil engineering and structures?
um, I have to go back to what I do. I'm really passionate about not necessarily structures or about passing the knowledge that I have to the new generation and seeing that it's really making an impact. And you don't see that until a few years down the road. When you see the generations that went through your classroom and see that they're doing great and the great things that they have accomplished. So I'm passionate about passing knowledge, irrespective of whether it's in engineering or some experiences, life experiences.
Yeah, I think that's so cool because that's like you found that passion with your work. And I don't think that happens for everyone where like kind of their life mission also aligns with their work and that comes through. And I think maybe that energizes you to do what you do when like now when things are super chaotic and weird, like you're still motivated by that passion, and that's like what gives you energy to carry you through. And I think all of us that were students or that past students see that in you too. So I think you did a great job of carrying that through. So implementation is great.
Absolutely.
So along those lines a little bit, so as a professional, so I've been out for almost 20 years from, school or whatever. What recommendation or what advice would you give those of us professionals for helping students these days? So what can we do to be more accommodating, more better mentors for students, new engineers, new students that are coming into the field?
We definitely, as experienced engineers, we want to nurture the new generation. And we have to let them know that it'll take them time to acquire and accumulate knowledge. It doesn't come overnight, no matter how book smart they are. So the main advice that we should give them is sink your teeth into every project you work on. You need to be very curious. You need to learn why we're doing the things we're doing, and ask for help. Don't just do things because you went back to a reference book and you saw it in a book, written in a book or in a reference. And they should be curious to know why we're doing the things that we are doing. It's not just applying an equation. Sometimes common sense goes long ways. So they have to learn to use common sense. They have to learn to seek knowledge beyond the application of a software or an equation. And this comes from people like you who have been out there for an extended period of time and have accumulated knowledge and experience. Sometimes I feel that as time passes by, I feel like I'm being exposed to, if you want to call it, new cultures, the new generations. Like the students that I teach nowadays are completely different from your generation in terms of their expectations, in terms of their preparation. So we have to keep reminding the new generations that it's okay to communicate with people who are not of their generation and probably are a little bit older. And so that's the main thing that I believe we should be helping the new generation, and be very accommodating. as I said, the expectations of the new generation now is completely different from expectations 15 years ago. Uh, so we have to be accommodating, and we have to learn their way of thinking. We shouldn't expect them to learn our way of thinking. We should learn how they think, and help them by attending to their way of thinking.
I think as you're saying that, so I mean, that makes sense, because those of us that have experience, like we already have that knowledge base. So a new student is coming in and they have to learn so much on the job anyway, from a technical standpoint. So like adding on to that, how to think, or how, you know, someone of an older generation is thinking, that's even one more thing to add on to something that's already daunting for them. Whereas if we as the older generation already have that baseline knowledge and technical competency, then we can learn how they think, right? And help with that so that we can teach them that knowledge. And then eventually then they can figure out how we think too, but like maybe not right away, because they're already trying to get up to a certain level technically.
Correct.
Which is challenging. I mean, that's the first year of being on the job is the hardest year for sure, because you're taking all of this information that you learn theoretically and implementing it in the real world. And I think for me, like one of the hardest things that I struggled with in that transition was thinking in 3D. So many of the things that we did in class and in school is, you know, a 2D beam or a column. And then when you get out in the real world and you have to put that all into the same context and transfer all those loads from the roof all the way down to the foundation, just being able to think in that regard is that was one of the biggest hurdles for me to get there. So if people are able to communicate the way that I needed to communicate in that time, like, then I think you get over one of those hurdles right away. So yes. I like how you said that.
School provides you with only the basic knowledge that will launch your career. So after that, it's basically personal effort.
And good mentors, like good mentors are so important. Professional mentors, yes. Yeah. Yes, for sure. Okay, so can you name one risk that you've had to take to get to where you're at right now? And you don't have to limit it to one.
Actually, I'm not a big risk taker, but I took two, if you want to call them risks or jumps in my professional life. The first one was the decision that I made to immigrate to the United States. So I was already married, had a small family. My children were not born yet, but it was a time when my wife and I decided that we either do it now at our age, or it'll be very difficult for us later on in life to make the change. And this is because of the unsettling situation back in the old country. Okay. So we decided that we need to move on. We want our children to grow up in an environment away from troubles and violence. And so that was, if you want to call it a major decision, it was a risk in a sense that we decided to leave our jobs, our profession behind and move on. It was a new life, a major change. But the bigger risk was for me to, after both of my children were born, was this decision to go back to graduate school. So it meant that less resources for the family. So my wife worked full time as a registered nurse to support the family. And I decided to go back to graduate school. So it took a few years, but we had a plan. We had a plan for the future. And those were the two main decisions, major decisions, or risks, if you want to call them. I could have stayed in the profession, and there was nothing wrong with that, without a graduate degree. I see many successful leaders in engineering without graduate degrees. So a graduate degree does not necessarily guarantee that you are going to become a better engineer or a leader. But going back to your question, a risk that I took, which led to where I am right now, this is the one.
Okay.
It's different when you are in school. I mean, if you are single, you don't have a family, and if you have a family that you need to support.
Yeah.
So that was the major risk, and it played out the way we had planned it, luckily.
Yep.
No major surprises. And the nice thing is, when I started here, my wife went back to school and she earned her doctorate as well.
Okay. Does she teach?
She started teaching, but she is now the dean of the School of Health Sciences at USD.
Okay. Well, that's awesome. So I feel like you guys both kind of had times where one of you was, you know, in their profession and the other one was gaining knowledge to kind of up to the next level in their profession. And now here you are both. You're the department head, and she is the dean as well. So
you spend a lifetime together.
Yes. Give and take. I love that. So who would be somebody that inspires you?
Well, people that inspire me, or individuals that inspire me, are disadvantaged children who overcome adversities and become very successful individuals. Well, for me, growing up, I was not living in an affluent environment by any stretch of the imagination. We were lower middle class, but life was simple, life was okay. So I was not faced with any major hurdles in my life, probably financial need every now and then, but nothing. But when you look at those who are really disadvantaged in life, and you see that they overcome adversities, they persevere, they work very hard, and then wow, they become very successful in life. So those are the people who inspire me, actually.
Yeah.
And you see many examples in real life.
I bet in school too, right?
In school, yes, absolutely.
And I think that takes a lot of awareness to see that, and to see that not everyone starts at zero. Like some people have to get there first. Like nobody, like the benchmark is different for everyone.
Absolutely.
So amazing to see how people overcome that. And I mean, just, you know, basic things that you normally wouldn't even think of, like, you know, being able to read and, you know, just all of those adversities that could come up. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
That's very inspiring. So, all right. Well, thanks. Thanks, Dr. Wehbe. This has been fun. So thanks for sitting down, and it's been good. These are things that I didn't know about you either. So
Terry, it was a pleasure sitting down with you and seeing you after all of these years. So I hope when you get a chance, you can swing by here and can show you around what's going on. I'm talking to you now from the from my office on the third floor of Crothers Engineering. When you were here, we were down in the basement on the first floor.
Yes.
So we're moving on.
Moving up. There's nowhere to go unless if you have a rooftop deck now.
That's it. That's the highest floor.